Welcome to Who We Are. I'm your host, Maya Kalaria. Decolonizing the power of narrative, Who We Are centers the voices of the global majority, people who have experienced colonial harm and marginalization. Those who may have lost connection to their cultures, lands, ancestral heritage, food, spiritualities, languages, and much more through colonization, and are now reclaiming their connection to their roots. This is a living archive for stories of struggle, hope, and healing from systems of oppression. It focuses not on what we do, but on who we are, a bridge between the legacy of our ancestors and those who come after us. So let us bear sacred witness to the stories that have silently lived inside our bodies, stories that long to be told and heard. This is who we are. Thank you, Laxmi, for being here, for being on the podcast today. I wanted to start by inviting you to share a little bit more about the people that you come from, the lands that they come from, maybe the tribes that they come from. Feel free to share whatever comes up for you.
So, I'm Laxmi and I am of mixed heritage, born here in London, first born in my family, I believe. I'm pretty sure. And also, I think the first born in my mum's family outside of the Philippines. So my mum was from the Philippines and my dad was from India. My mum was born in the Philippines, and then when she was 18, there was this mass sort of drive for Filipino overseas workers to apply for jobs overseas, benefit the economy, and leave, because up until fairly recently the Philippines has been kind of bordering on being a developing country and has had quite vast pockets of poverty for quite a long time. So during the early 70s, there was like one of the first mass drives for people to come to the UK. And my mum applied, and it's all like you apply on a paperwork basis. You don't know where you're going. You don't know who you're going to meet. You get a job, and her job happened to be a nanny living in home for a young couple at the time who had recently had children in Kent, English family. And it was like literally you buy your ticket, get on a plane and come to England. My dad was from India. He was born in India in Gujarat, and he lived there until he was about 19, 20, and then had an arranged marriage to an Indian woman, but Kenyan national. And I hope that's all correct, because my brothers, if they're listening. And then they got married and they moved to Kenya. So they then spent the next sort of 11, 12 years of their lives there. My dad, he was the manager of a hotel, and, they had a really fruitful life there. I think it was one of the most successful times of my dad's life, is the way that he kind of describes it, or then kind of, my dad didn't give a lot away, but that's kind of, he enjoyed that time. He had a fun car. He had one of those Volkswagen Beetles, and I think it was like a pink color. And, he was quite well respected in his job, and he really enjoyed it. And then they had their first, we're 5 siblings, and he had his first 2 children there, 2 boys. And then after about 12 years, they were kind of pushed to come to England, and he'd kind of come on a few visits beforehand and sort of set that kind of in motion, and left his eldest here because it kind of coincided with the term time, and went back and brought the rest of his family over. And then when he got here, his relationship in his first marriage started to sort of break down a few years later. And in the 1970s, when my mum arrived, they kind of met, and that they were together for the rest of their lives. And yeah, that's kind of I'm trying to make it brief, but that's kind of an all round history of my parents.
Wow. And how did your parents meet, if you don't mind me asking?
So it's one of those my cousins, uncles, sisters. So my mum's older sister's husband has a stepsister, and they all kind of grew up like they're kind of a similar age, my mum and her, and she's basically an extended auntie to me and my siblings. And she met my dad, I think, just before my mum came over or during the time that my mum was here. And she really got on with my dad. And even until my dad passed away, she was so fond of him and the memories they had as youngsters. And she invited my dad to a party and also invited my mum to a party. And my dad said, "I saw your mum from across the dance floor." One of those really sort of like cheesy stories that when you're little you don't appreciate. And he said it was sort of love at first sight. And my mum really sort of played it off. She was like, he just chased me and chased me. And so we always got the vibe that it was dad who, really wanted to be with my mum more than my mum. But I think when my mum passed away, it was more like we realized that it was very much mutual. It was just what my mum played off was quite funny.
Wow. That's really, really interesting. And I love this, the combination in your family of the Filipino heritage from your mum's side and then the Gujarati heritage from your father's side. And I wanted to ask you a bit more about your mum's side. And was there anything that she passed down to you culturally in terms of stories or foods or traditions or just little things that you recall that kind of got embedded into you?
Oh, 100%. Like, I fully identify as being Filipino,
Right.
whereas being Indian is really difficult for me to truly feel as an identity. And when my dad died, I actually felt like that was the last pillar of me being Indian. And now it's really hard to put myself in that space and feel like I can stand amongst other Indians and say, look, I am Indian because of my dad. But I feel like that's the only thing that I can say, because my mum, it's mannerisms, it's, jokes, it's food, it's culture, she gave us all of that and took us to the Philippines every few years since we were little. We have a massive, massive extended family. So there's no way that I can't distinguish all of the Filipino characteristics that, like, I can laugh at all the jokes. I understand a little bit of the language. And, I know as soon as I'm near a Filipino. Whereas, and it's not that I don't know when I'm around Indians or even Gujaratis, but it's just so much harder to identify that part of myself and be authentic in it. Or not even be authentic, but just feel like I belong.
Mm.
Because my dad, I guess because he traveled to Kenya, spent so much of his life in Kenya, and then spent the rest of his life here. And my dad lived a long life. He lived until he was 87. Was he more British than he was Indian or Kenyan? Or was he more Kenyan than he was Indian? Or I don't know. So I think the unfortunate, sad elements of that. And also my dad lost his own dad very young. So I never had the opportunity to meet my grandparents at all. And so I think there was no extended family to show all of the different nuance of being Indian. obviously I have my two older brothers and we're so lucky to be such a close family here. But they were never born in India. They were born in Kenya and they left when they were really young. So they're more British than they are. Um, yeah, it's complicated, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very complicated. And as someone whose mum was born in Kenya as an Indian woman, and then my dad was born in Uganda, I totally understand that twice removed element of being Indian, because I very much feel that too. And I think one of the sad impacts of colonization is that movement of Indians to Africa.
Yes.
Originally because there was indentured servants that were shipped
Absolutely.
over, and then maybe our family went because there were already communities building at that point, even though maybe our families weren't taken over as indentured servants. That was the original reason why there were so many people there. And it can all be traced back to, colonization. And it's really sad, to hear as well that like you feel, it's amazing that you feel so connected to your Filipino roots, but it is sad as well that like, because of that movement and because of that twice removed nature of that movement of people, and the assimilation into whiteness as well, the assimilation into
100%. And I think that's that has a lot to do with, and now obviously I can see that as an adult and not a child. And I think there's also a big difference of being able to understand that as a child, one, taking away the kind of elements that we tend to be embarrassed about because we grow up in countries that colonized us, and that kind of long-held stereotype of, like, do you remember when you were at school, for example, at high school, like teasing people that were fresh off the boat because
100%.
and like you called them freshies, and that was in a way a derogatory term because they were so fresh, there was this sort of connotation that they didn't know anything, that they were stupid, and they didn't know our ways. And that's the thing, like you then didn't hang out with them, you ostracized them, and that's a colonization of our minds, right? Because that's what we've been taught. And that's something I wish but that's the sad thing, like you're a child and that's just what happens. I certainly wasn't intelligent enough to know the difference and the impact that it would have on me long term. Now I wish I paid more attention to how harmful that was.
Yeah. But I think also it's like, I don't even know if it's about being intelligent enough to know the difference, because who really spoke to us about these things as well,
Yeah.
I mean, I won't speak for your parents, but I know for mine, they didn't sit me down and say, this is what's happened to us. This is the history of our people. And I want you to be proud of who you are.
Yeah.
Those things weren't spoken about. So I think, we do get swept up with these things when we're younger because we don't always have the rootedness, and it's no one's fault.
Yeah. And the Philippines has been colonized. It was colonized by the Spanish for over 300 years. And the way to colonize the Filipino people was through religion. So because 200 or 300 years is enough time to lose, like there is obviously no written archives in the same way that there are today. There's nothing digital. So it's enough generations to lose a lot of information. So a lot of families don't know where they come from because their names have also changed. And for example, I don't know where my family necessarily originally come from. And there was mentioned that one of my grandmothers was from a tribal background, and that the first time I went to the Philippines, I was 5 years old. And so being the first time that my mum brought all of her children, there was a lot of parties to be had. And that's the great thing about Filipinos, is that they then congregate and all of the family. And my mum had a huge family, like I'm one of 47
Wow.
in my generation. And so both of my grandmothers on my grandmother and my grandfather's side came to these celebrations, a party that was held one day, because it also came around Christmas time and New Year's. And one of my great grandmothers was like 106 years old at the time. And she got on a bus for several hours to get to our town. And my mum had mentioned to my half brother, who's from my dad's side, who happened to be on this trip with us, that the reason she could get on a bus and that she was so fit and healthy was that because she was from a tribe that lived in the mountains. So they lived really long. And I didn't even know this until really recently, that this was even part of my heritage. But I have no real tangible way of tracing that back because she's no longer here. My grandparents are no longer here. I know a lot of my mum's siblings are still here, but I don't know if they even know, you know? I haven't had that conversation because I've not been to the Philippines since I found this out.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, like, we lose so much, even if, yeah, it's such a sad, it's a hard thing to, you know, especially when you're trying, especially being of mixed heritage, or, you know, when you've been, you're a child of immigrants and trying to find out who, you know, identity is so important to us. It's very difficult to not know that that's just accessible in some way.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many removals there and so much fragmentation on both sides.
Yeah.
It's just this constant fragmentation. And like you were saying, the Christianization of the Philippines. I mean, I only recently found out that Philippines was called the Philippines because of King Philip.
Because of, yes.
I was horrified. You know, it really is such a horrific stamp of domination and such an erasure. I think that's the thing. It feels like this erasure of the truth of who you are as a people, and then the Christianization as well that happened, which I'm no doubt was probably brutal as anything, as most of these missionary and Christian things are. And so the names as well that people have now compared to the names that you would have had, you know.
Yeah, they're all Spanish names.
Yeah. So it is this kind of just this fragmentation. And I wanted to ask you, what have you been called to do to reconnect with those parts of you? And it might not be easy, but have there been intuitive things as well, or like feeling based ways that you've connected?
I think having lost when I lost my mum, I didn't have that kind of clash of identity that I did when I lost my dad. And so with my mum, I just felt it was really, you know, when you've grown up somewhere else, but you can equally call somewhere else home because it's where your heart is.
Yeah.
That's the Philippines for me.
Right.
And that's just because of the way my mum made it part of who we are. And she just instilled this value of family amongst us as siblings and my immediate family, but also extending to her family, my dad's family. But it was always, even though she never said it, it was always family is the most important thing. And so immediately when my mum died, I felt a calling to be there. And so, and I'm really lucky in that we have a very unique relationship as a family. We're a huge family, you know. If I count my uncles and my auntie and all the children of children, there's probably close to 100 of us, if not more. But we have a massive Facebook group. We send each other happy birthdays in there. We congratulate each other when there's a big event. If they've achieved something, everyone puts it in the group. We've organized a wedding through this group. It's phenomenal that you can meet people, the tie of kinship and the familial tie of my family, in that some of them I've only met once or twice, but I feel them in my bones. And then that kind of draws me to them all the time and draws me to being in circles that help me to understand more about my culture and about food, and draws me to want to cook and explore recipes, because 10 years ago we didn't have the same access to recipes we do today. but I can Google, a place in a certain part and see what their cuisine's like, and probably try to find a good recipe that many people have cooked and say is authentic. And not that I go and do that, but I do search for recipes that are, from my mum's region in the Philippines. And the offshoot of that is that because dad had so many different layers of being in different places for such a long time, there's obviously this element of his cuisine was influenced in different ways. And the reason food is so important to my family in particular, and I know it's really important to us as people in general, is that both my parents cooked for most of their working life. I grew up in a corner shop. My dad was mostly in corner shops for his career life. And my dad was quite innovative in that way, in that he opened a corner shop in St. John's Wood. He had the lease on this for probably a few decades. And the last decade of it fell in my lifetime. And so when I was born there in St. John's Wood. And my dad put a cafe in, like, not a cafe, he put a kitchen in the back, which wasn't like normally in London, you could walk into a lot of corner shops and get a cup of tea. It was like, in those polystyrene cups with the plastic lid. Do you remember that? You could do that in many, many corner shops. And, it was like 60p. And my dad started like that. And then eventually he put a kitchen in it. And, he would serve curries and they would make fresh sandwiches. But the sandwiches were not like your bog standard. Like, they would do that, but they would be quite, they would experiment. And then they would make field rotis and all of that kind of stuff. And so I think being in South Asian communities, meeting South Asians here, my dad's cuisine was then influenced by other South Asians. And like, I didn't make the connection until recently, but he always used to cook Singapore noodles. And I was like, why Singapore noodles for most of my childhood? It's like, what is the relevance of this? And then obviously it's because there is a large community of South Asians in Malaysia and Indonesia and it only just occurred to me because I heard the word Singapore noodles recently. And I then made the connection because I'd completely forgot that was something that they did. But yeah, and then eventually, hospitality is difficult. Obviously, a lot of people will tell you that. But eventually the corner shop thing became a cafe behind Bond Street. And then after Bond Street, he went into sort of just making stuff in a warehouse kitchen. And then they distributed them across all of the central London tube station shops.
Right.
So like Treats and all of the like little corner shops that were in the stations, a lot of them were the sandwiches and stuff were supplied by my dad.
Wow. That is so innovative. And it kind of does speak to the spirit of people who immigrated here and who had to make a living for themselves and start their lives here. It is that classic ingenuity that we see.
Yeah. No, 100%. It's like, I'll say to someone, if you walked through Baker Street probably in the 90s and had a sandwich from Treats, that probably came from my dad.
Wow.
Well, my mum and dad.
And it also makes me think of like how the imagination is necessary. His imagination, like, I can do this, I'd like to do this, and to believe in that, no matter what anyone was saying. And he did it. That's quite an achievement.
No, exactly. And I think also it speaks to the resourcefulness of the kind of cultures that we come from, especially generally not being wealthy people. And like, especially in Filipino culture, lots of Filipinos will tell you how resourceful their parents are and how they never throw anything out. And that's exactly what is ingrained into you. It's like, what can, you'd ask them to buy you something for school and mum would be like, use whatever's in the house. Like, find something in the house, or, it's that kind of mentality that I think we all have in us that, and also being sustainable and wanting and having a deeper connection with the world, because we're always not trying to abuse it in the way that means that we just take more and more and more from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask as well, like when you were growing up, let's take the Filipino culture and the Filipino name and the family name. You know, in some situations, it's so normalized that that is just how it is. Were you aware, or when were you aware, that actually colonization had happened and actually the roots of your people pre-colonization were very different? Like, was there a conscious awakening in terms of, oh my God, like because of the Spanish? And then, you know, when did that happen for you and how?
I think it was very slow for me because a lot of my family are not from the city. And I think being so, when you go from a country like ours, which is developed, it's wealthy, it's quite a humbling experience to go to a country that is, in essence, still developing. And because we went so often as kids, I think that's what made us more appreciative of what we have here. You know, up until we were teenagers, the bathroom in my mum's family home, ancestral home, didn't have running water. And, you know, you'd bath, there's a well directly outside the back door, and you would fill the well up, fill a bucket up in the bathroom and shower that way. So it's cold water. I know it's a hot country, but it's still the shock factor. And then, you know, like having to, it didn't, like, also when I brought my firstborn there, like having to sterilize everything because we come from such a sterile environment that young children can't handle it the same way that children born there are. But I think it was a very slow unfolding for me, because even though there wasn't some like awakening in my head, it wasn't like, oh, I've lived in ignorance for so long and boom, there was this moment. It was more, I knew the difference between, you know, my mum's family being from such a rural environment and having a lot less. And apart from the sort of naming things, the traditions are still like, yes, there's a lot of religion involved in the family sort of like everyday customs, but things like food have not changed massively unless you're in the more city environment. And obviously the cities tend to be more progressive, but I was never in the city. Like the first time that I'd ever actually seen Manila, in that I stayed there, was in 2023. Up until that point, I had never stayed in the city ever. Every time we would just get in the car and go straight to my mum's town. There, everything probably functions in a very similar way to the way it has for years, apart from the fact that there's a church and a lot of activities like Sunday, there being church. And I think apart from the religious aspect, a lot of the other things were quite unchanged, which is why for me it was a good way to be involved in. I don't think that I saw the colonial aspect as in the same way, but as I get older, obviously there are more things that I realize that I sort of thought were really cool when I was young that I now realize have a big colonial footprint. Like the jeepneys, for example. So the jeepneys are what are renowned as now kind of a symbol of Philippine identity, in that from a tourism aspect, they are these kind of kitsch vehicles. You know, the Filipinos paint them, they put all these cool trinkets in them. They're just so ornate, but they're the main mode of transport in the Philippines and have been for many decades. But they are post-war vehicles left by the US. And basically, there was no, like, you couldn't remove this many vehicles. There's so many of them that the Filipinos, with their resourcefulness, made them into public transport. But now there is this kind of phasing out of them, which the Filipinos are really upset by, because they want to hold on to this element of culture, which has obviously arisen by colonialism, but has shown how resourceful the Filipinos are, which is also part of who they are as people. So it's a real, it's a juxtaposition, but it's, yeah, don't know that I answered that properly, but I think the nature of the dynamic of my family means that it's been very slow and yeah.
Yeah. And I totally understand that juxtaposition as well. It's like we've, as colonized people, we've all absorbed things into our culture that were part of colonialism, and then they've become beloved things, because they had to be. We had to create something beautiful out of something horrific.
Yeah.
And we did it so well, all of us, and it sounds like this is exactly what the Filipino people did. They did it so well. And so even though it is like this memory of a time that was actually, kept them in some sort of oppression, still it's part of their culture now. So it's really hard to pull that apart.
I know. And someone, when I posted a photo of one on my last trip, and someone replied saying that they'd been on a backpacking trip, I think, and said that one of them literally just took photos of them all the time. And I love that they appreciated how cool they are and how ornate and unique they are. But at the same time, I was just like, that's not what the Philippines is. It's like, yes, the way that we have transformed these vehicles is part of what we are. But if you literally just, I know that I'm probably exaggerating this, but if you literally just came to the Philippines and were obsessed by jeepneys, then did you really see the Philippines, and did you really see the people for who they are and all of the other culture that exists, like the actual heritage that is still there? And yeah, it's hard because you're obviously like, one part of you wants to be like, well, and the other part of you is like, but they are really important display of how we make do and make a situation much better than it was.
Yeah. And it's evidence as well. It's evidence of what happened to your people.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's the both and. It's like, on many levels, we wish that they'd never have to put up with this. And then on the other hand, if these things get taken away, this chasm will appear where colonial violence and colonial history is just erased. And then there's these huge gaps.
But I also think it's the dismissal of the fact that it existed, like, oh, they're so amazing. They're like really cool vehicles. And it's like the dismissal of the actual history behind it. Like,
right.
I think that's what it is as well. That we all have to carry, right? We carry this on a daily basis, and it's just that how nonchalant those comments can be. Yeah.
And I think this is why these kind of conversations and other conversations like this is so important, because it is about almost unburdening our bodies from the history that we have to carry because they're not being spoken in the public as much as they could be. I know that colonialism is becoming more of a buzzword and people are saying more about it, but there's so much further that we can go with this.
So I think, like, we also know from everything that's going on in the world is that when someone, often what's happened, I think I found, is where I've then gone into explaining what these things mean, you're met with silence. And I think that's the hardest thing. That's actually harder than what you said in the first place.
Yeah. And why do you think they're silent? Where do you think that silence comes from with these kind of people?
Just not wanting to deal with conflict, that arose from your ancestry that you feel you don't need to hold on to, because That's your privilege, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not asking you to apologize to me. I'm just asking you to acknowledge that we carry a lot more complicated history than, we can't just walk out our door and feel like there isn't things that are never going to impact us because of all of the things that have happened to our ancestors. And, that it gets passed down no matter how happy our lives are, right? There is always this trauma which is part of who we are. And just to acknowledge that, is one of the things that I find very difficult when people don't want to accept that these things ever happened, or it's all right to just be silent about the fact that they did.
Yeah. Because they want to hold on to their comfort and their privilege.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
the thing is, as long as they hold on to their comfort and their privilege, we stay uncomfortable and underprivileged.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we're carrying what they refuse to carry. And that's not fair anymore. Well, it was never fair, but now we're realizing we're not going to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree.
So as we reach the end of our conversation, I wanted to ask you, what kind of, this is a big question, so take what resonates and leave what doesn't. It's a big one. But thinking about our descendants, and I mean our children, those who are of our children's age, the young ones who are like coming of age in this world, and those that come after them, generations after that. What kind of world would you like to leave behind for them? What kind of world would you like them to grow up into?
One where they don't always have to be brave.
Right.
I think with my art, I forget that a lot of it is being brave because it's not it's not stereotypical, or it's not tradition for someone like me to pursue an art career. And what I love, and I think that I see that as a massive change. Like, it feels like such a simple thing, but the fact that my youngest thinks that everyone in the world goes to go and work in a studio means that he already sees that that's not an obstacle for him.
Yeah.
And that's what I want, where they don't have to question what they can achieve, that they don't have to think that someone or some sort of institution or country's traditions will stop them from doing whatever they want to achieve. It's just like like recently I was talking about the fact that travel is becoming more difficult because of our backgrounds and everything that's going on in the world. And like, for example, with everything that's going on in the US right now, I don't think I would feel safe taking my children with the name that I have to the US. Like, I feel like I've been up against situations before with a Muslim name, Muslim surname, because obviously I have also married into a relationship. My husband is of mixed heritage as well, and from a Muslim background, and I've converted to Islam, and that adds even more.
Yeah.
So many more layers. And I'm not doing this in isolation. There are probably so many more of me, and families there are more families like me, where we cannot, it's difficult because as a person you can't lean into all of those cultures because it's not always accepted, right? Like, where I've talked about the fact that it's hard for me to lean into being Indian, but as the way that we're seen or perceived by the world is that we are all of those things. I cannot say, no, I'm not actually, like, I can't decide, even though I don't feel it, but I am already in that box. And I love every part of where I came from and every part of what I've married into and what my children are becoming. But they can't decide that for themselves. It's already decision that has been made, like how they're going to be governed and what they're going to be able to do. I don't want that for them. And that's what I hope that they get to see in their lifetime.
Yeah. And I think there's more chance of that happening for them than there was for us, even though right now there's just so much chaos. I think that chaos is because that is trying to happen.
Yes.
You know, there is that energy is trying to unoppress itself and
and we're
allow
no longer
for us
just lying down and, you know,
taking it.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Laxmi, so much for sharing so much of your story and the struggles and the hopes as well of you and the people that you come from. And I know we could be talking for hours and hours because there is just so much more to unpack. But I hope that this can give people just a taste of, you know, of who you are and your story.
Thank you.
So yeah, thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you for having me.